You make good money, maybe more than you ever thought you would, more than most people around you. And yet, there's this thing, this quiet hum underneath everything. It's not loud enough to be a crisis. It's not dramatic enough to explain. It's just there. A quiet financial anxiety that doesn't seem to match the numbers in your account. And it shows up most often in people who, on paper, should feel the safest. You check your balance more often than you'd like to admit. Not out of fear, exactly. More like checking to see if the feeling has caught up yet. It hasn't. You earn well. You spend carefully, mostly. You're not reckless. You don't have a gambling problem or a secret death spiral. Nothing obvious. But something doesn't add up, and you know it. The stress you feel about money doesn't fit the income you've built. And that mismatch, high income paired with persistent financial anxiety, is exactly what this pattern creates. And that gap between what you earn and how anxious you still feel, that's what this video is about. Before we go any further, I want to say something clearly. You are not bad with money. That's not a reassurance. That's an important observation. Because the patterns we're going to look at today don't happen to careless people. They don't happen to people who ignore their finances or spend without thinking. They happen to people exactly like you. People who read the articles, who know the difference between an asset and a liability, who've sat down and done the math more than once, who feel a mild, dull guilt when they spend on something nice, which means they're paying attention. You're not here because you're broken or undisciplined. You're here because something isn't working despite doing a lot of things right. And that, honestly, is a harder problem to solve than simple overspending. Simple overspending has a simple answer. What you're experiencing doesn't. And part of why it persists is that it's almost invisible. Not to the people around you, not to your bank, but to you, because it hides inside the very decisions that feel the most justified. That's what makes it so persistent. That's what makes it a trap, not just a habit. So this isn't about blaming you. It's not about listing things you're doing wrong. It's about shining a light on something that's been operating mostly in the background, quietly, methodically, for years. In fact, among high-earning professionals, this quiet financial anxiety is becoming surprisingly common, even when income keeps rising. Take a breath. This is going to feel familiar. Here's the trap. Every time your income went up, your sense of what was normal quietly went with it. Not your spending necessarily, not at first. Your baseline, your floor, your invisible sense of what you are now entitled to experience in housing, in food, in travel, in the texture of your everyday life. That number moved silently, without your permission. And because it moved incrementally, a slightly nicer apartment here, a car upgrade you technically could afford there, a recurring service you signed up for after a raise, it never felt like a decision. It felt like arriving. That's the phrase worth sitting with. Arriving. Because for most high earners, lifestyle upgrades don't feel like indulgence. They feel like recognition. Like finally matching the external to the internal. Like you've worked this hard, been this disciplined, waited this long, and now you're simply living in a way that reflects that. The trap isn't the spending. The trap is what happens to your reference point. Because once the new baseline is set, the stress doesn't disappear. It recalibrates. The same underlying anxiety that used to live around $5,000 a month in expenses now lives around $9,000. You haven't escaped financial pressure. You've inflated it. And here's the part that's genuinely unsettling. Your brain doesn't register it as a shift. It registers it as normal.
The $250 dinner doesn't feel extravagant. The $4,000 a month rent doesn't feel like a stretch. The subscriptions, the premium versions, the upgraded everything, none of it feels like a choice anymore. It feels like a requirement. And requirements don't feel like freedom. They feel like weight.
The mechanism behind this is called hedonic adaptation. But I'm not going to leave it as a psychology term, because once it becomes a term, it becomes something you can dismiss, something academic. And what this actually does to your day-to-day experience is anything but academic. Here's what's happening inside the mechanism. Your brain is, above almost anything else, a comparison engine. It doesn't evaluate how good or bad something is in absolute terms. It evaluates it relative to what it has recently experienced. This is efficient, brilliantly efficient, actually. It means your brain doesn't have to hold the entire history of human experience in working memory every time you sit down to a meal or get in your car. It just asks, how does this compare to last time? The problem is that this same system governs how you feel about money. When your income increases, your brain doesn't celebrate indefinitely. It recalibrates. It uses the new level of income and the new level of spending that tends to follow as its updated reference point. Within months, sometimes weeks, the raise that felt life-changing becomes the new neutral. And from the new neutral, everything below it starts to feel like a regression. This is the thought, I've worked too hard to go back. That thought leads to an emotion, not quite fear, not quite pride, something closer to a low-grade protectiveness, a resistance to anything that might feel like a step down, an almost subconscious vigilance. And that emotion leads to behavior that looks, from the outside, perfectly rational. You maintain the apartment because the neighborhood actually is better. You keep the car because it's still under warranty. You don't cancel the subscription because you do use it occasionally. Every individual decision holds up under scrutiny. But the cumulative effect of all those decisions, all shaped by a baseline that keeps drifting upward, is a lifestyle that requires your full income just to sustain. No slack, no cushion, no room to breathe. And so the stress remains. Not because you earn too little, but because your baseline has grown as fast as or faster than your income, and the gap between what you earn and what your lifestyle costs has either stayed the same or quietly narrowed. You're running to stay in place, and the floor keeps rising. This channel explores patterns like this, the quiet psychological mechanisms that shape how intelligent people handle money. If that kind of thinking interests you, you may want to subscribe.
Let's make this concrete, not hypothetical, specific. The first place it shows up is housing. You moved somewhere nicer a few years ago, logically sound, your income had gone up, the commute was better, the building was safer, the neighborhood matched where you are in your career. Every reason was real. But now that rent or that mortgage is the ceiling your entire financial life is built around. And when you sit down to think about savings or margin or what you could actually change if you wanted to, that housing cost is fixed, immovable. It's just the price of being you now. It doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It's just the baseline. The second place it shows up is smaller and quieter and more insidious. It's the accumulation of premium defaults, the olive oil that replaced the one you used to buy, the gym membership at the nicer facility, the grocery store where everything is slightly more expensive but the experience is better, the hotel tier you now book because the other one feels wrong. None of these are large. None of them would embarrass you if someone looked at your bank statement, but added together, across 12 months, they represent thousands of dollars a year that are invisible because each individual choice feels completely reasonable. You don't notice them as upgrades anymore. They're just what you buy. The third manifestation is social. When your income goes up, your circle often shifts, gradually,
naturally. The friends, the colleagues, the social contexts you move in start to have a different spending gravity. The dinners cost more, the holidays are longer, the gifts are different. And again, none of it is forced, it's organic. But your social life now has a price of entry that didn't exist 5 years ago. And stepping back from it doesn't just feel financially complicated, it feels like a social signal, like a statement about where you belong. So you don't step back. Stop for just a moment here. Think about the last time your spending felt genuinely optional, not just one item, the whole shape of your month. When was it? How long ago? The fourth is the subscriptions and services you've quietly automated. Not the obvious ones you'd catch in an audit, the software tools, the premium tiers, the accounts that auto-renew, the ones that existed for a reason 6 months ago that may no longer apply. They've become part of the infrastructure of your life, and infrastructure is not something you evaluate, it's something you maintain. And the fifth, this one is subtle, is the way you respond to discounts. You used to use them, actively, without embarrassment. Now there's a version of you that feels something strange when a coupon is involved. Not shame exactly, more like misalignment, like it doesn't fit the image. So you don't use them. Not always consciously. Sometimes you just don't look. The menu price is the price. That's just how things are now. Each of these on its own is entirely defensible. Together, they are the mechanism running continuously in the background, quietly consuming the headroom that should feel like freedom.
Here is what this costs you. Not in a single year, over time. The first cost is invisible, and it's the most significant. It is the compounding you didn't do. Not because you were reckless, because your baseline kept expanding to meet your income. And the money that was never invested because it was absorbed into the elevated normal doesn't just sit somewhere, it's gone. And so is everything it would have become. This is not a calculation meant to frighten you. It's an observation about how quietly this operates over a decade. The second cost is freedom. Not the word freedom in an aspirational sense. Literal, practical freedom. The ability to say no to a job you've grown to resent without catastrophic consequence. The ability to take 6 months off without it unraveling everything. The ability to make a decision based on what you actually want rather than what the math requires. When your baseline is high and your margin is low, that freedom is theoretical. It exists in principle, not in practice. And what's quietly devastating is that you earned your way into this situation. You didn't fail your way here, you succeeded your way here. Every raise, every promotion, every step up felt like expanding your options. But the baseline moved with you, and the options, in some real sense, stayed the same. The third cost is the chronic low-grade anxiety. This is the one that's hardest to see from the inside because it's so constant that it stops feeling like anxiety and starts feeling like you. It's the background noise, the low hum, the reason you check your account at 11 at night even though nothing has changed. The reason a large unexpected expense, a car repair, a medical bill, hits differently than it should given your income. It's not irrational. The anxiety exists because the margin is real. Your lifestyle genuinely does require what you earn. There is genuinely not much slack. And so the anxiety is in a strange way correct, which makes it impossible to talk yourself out of. This is why so many high earners quietly feel more financial tension than they expected success to bring. The fourth cost is something harder to name. It's the quiet erosion of satisfaction. Because the mechanism of hedonic adaptation doesn't only move your baseline upward, It also moves your capacity for satisfaction. The $200 dinner that genuinely felt special 3 years ago is now an ordinary Tuesday. The hotel room that would have felt luxurious when you were 28 is now acceptable. Fine. The car you drove off the lot with real excitement is now just the thing you drive. This isn't ingratitude. This is biology. Your brain adapted. It does this automatically. But the result is that you keep spending at a level that used to produce satisfaction and now produces mostly maintenance. You're paying for a feeling that has already moved on.
I want to offer you something here that isn't advice. It's just a series of questions. You don't have to answer them out loud. You don't have to write anything down. Just let them land. When you imagine cutting your monthly expenses by 20%, what is the first feeling that comes up? Not the thought, the feeling. Is it relief? Or does something in you resist before you've even done the math? When you think about the things you spend money on regularly, how many of them would you describe as genuinely chosen? Not just continued, not just maintained because they're already there. Actually actively chosen today. Has your relationship with money gotten easier as you've earned more, or has it gotten louder? Think about the last time you made a purchase that you didn't slightly justify, where you didn't even briefly construct a reason for why it made sense. When was that? Is there a version of your life, a quieter version, a less expensive version, that actually sounds appealing? Or does it sound like going backward? That last one is worth sitting with, because if a simpler life sounds like failure, not just uncomfortable, not just unfamiliar, but actually like a step down in status, then the trap isn't just financial, it's identity level. And identity level patterns don't respond to budgets. Here's what changes when you name this clearly. Not everything. Nothing changes overnight. But something shifts when you can see a pattern as a pattern, rather than experiencing it as just the texture of your life. The baseline drift is not a personal flaw. It is a predictable, well-documented, almost universal feature of human psychology as applied to income and lifestyle. Which means you didn't invent it. You're not uniquely susceptible. You are one of millions of people for whom the same mechanism is running in the same quiet background, quietly making every raise feel like a new floor, rather than an expansion of options. Naming it doesn't automatically change behavior, but it does change the nature of the experience, because when you recognize that a purchase is being made from the baseline, from that low-grade protectiveness, that resistance to regression, it becomes observable. And observable things are different from invisible ones. You can watch the pattern run without being entirely inside it. You can notice the thought, "I've worked too hard to go back," and recognize it as a signal the mechanism is active, not as a truth, as a signal. That's not a small thing. Most people never get outside the pattern long enough to see it operating. They spend their entire career wondering why more never quite feels like enough, and they conclude it's something wrong with them. It's not. It's something the brain does automatically in the presence of rising income and normalizing comfort. Seeing it doesn't make you immune,
But it does mean you can at least ask a different question. Not, how do I spend less, but which parts of this baseline did I actually choose, and which parts just happened to me?
The stress you've been carrying doesn't mean you've failed. It means you've been living inside a system, a very ordinary, very human system, that quietly expands its own requirements every time you expand your income. Not because you're weak, not because you lack discipline, because that is exactly what this mechanism does to everyone, including people who know about it. You came into this video with a feeling you couldn't quite explain, a gap between what you earn and how financially secure you actually feel. Maybe that gap makes a little more sense now. Not fixed, not resolved, but clearer. And sometimes clarity is the thing that was missing. If something in this resonated, if there was a moment where you recognized yourself, or a question in that self-test that sat differently than the others, leave that in the comments. Not what you're going to do about it, just what you noticed. That's enough for now.